The black community has been suffering with a curse that has been affecting them for over 100 years. I saw this when I moved from the south side of Chicago when I was younger to the southwest suburbs when my parents started doing better financially. Malcolm X's life is a prime example of how this curse progresses. In this video, I'm gonna break down his life into 3 parts, show you how the curse progresses through his life, and then discuss the curse in detail and how to overcome it at the end. If you want to stay to the end, I actually have a resource that I believe will help a lot of people break this curse that may not realize how this curse has affected them, just like in Malcolm X's life, he never realized it until it was too late. I've always wanted to understand why more people in our community struggle so much. Growing up on the south side of Chicago and moving to the predominantly white south suburbs of Chicago for the later part of my childhood really gave me a unique opportunity. I was able to see what it's like growing up in a low-income inner city versus the wealthier upper middle class area of the south suburbs. The amazing experiences and growth I saw wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for the sacrifices of my ancestors before me, the blessings God has bestowed upon me and my family, and the drive my parents had to put me into a better situation. Although I was very privileged later in my childhood, many people weren't this privileged growing up in my community at all. I know people who grew up in the inner city Chicago who rarely left their neighborhood. Many of my friends had never traveled outside of the city they lived in, let alone the state or the country. This strikes a very interesting question, yet very deep question. Why are we so limited in our experiences, our finances, and our growth as a community? Many people in our community, when asked, will say, "It's all the white man's fault, he did it to us. We're killing our own people and can't trust them. I'll take care of myself and I'm not gonna worry about anybody else out here." Although these have some deep history and truth behind these statements, these do not speak to the generational curse that the black community is facing. We need to understand our history before we understand the curse and how it progresses. Luckily, Malcolm X's biography, Autobiography, does a good job at giving us a look into pretty recent history. First part of his life is described by Malcolm X's rise in understanding. Education is our passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to the people who prepare for it today. Malcolm X quote. Malcolm X was an African-American revolutionary and human rights activist. His autobiography is a great book, and for those who haven't read it, check it out. His life, as I understand it, is defined into 3 parts: the rise in understanding, the true educational turnaround, and the fall in the lessons he wants to pass on. Malcolm X was born in the 1920s to a 2-parent household where his mother and father were poor, but took care of their family to the best of their ability. Malcolm's dad was a Baptist pastor and was heavily influenced by Marcus Messiah Garvey. Malcolm's mom was a white presenting black woman, and this will be very important later. The rise in understanding starts early in his life and was heavily defined by the death of his dad after being lynched by racist white people down south. This led to his realization that white racism was real and ever present. After Malcolm's dad died, his life took a turn for the worse. His mom went crazy and was put into a mental institution. Him and his siblings were split up and taken and put into different families by the foster care system. This led him to having his own experiences with racism, which led to him moving to Boston. His racist experiences included being called the N-word by white people openly, being treated like a commodity in his own town for being black and playing basketball, and being told by his teacher in middle school he couldn't be a lawyer because he was black. Due to Malcolm having a lighter skin tone, he was treated a little bit better than other black people though. But the experience with his teacher after being top academically in his class was his final straw. He shortly moved to Boston for high school after reconnecting and reaching out to Ella, an old friend of his dad's. While in Boston, he saw the difference between bougie black people and the black people who had not lost touch with their culture and assimilated away from who they were. In Boston, he got his first job, made a good friend group, and even found his love for dancing. It wasn't all good things though, because he also started committing crimes because of bad influences around him. His life took a turn for the worse after running in with the law, and after his run-in with the law, he had to move to Harlem due to his criminal activity catching up with him. He started selling drugs and taking a lot of drugs as well, and he became a pimp and a thief, which ultimately landed him in jail. Due to the racial tensions of the time and the discrimination, Malcolm and his friends who were caught received large sentences by the judge that were not normal for the crime that they were caught committing. The second part of his life goes jail, education, and the betrayal. Keeping a man behind bars will never reform a man, but only keep the memory ingrained in the man. Malcolm X quote. While in jail, Malcolm struggled to kill his drug habit due to using $20 a day of cocaine alone, and he also smoked weed as well. In jail, they were able to use nutmeg as a drug to get high, and that's what he turned to in the beginning. It seems pretty disheartening that in jail he immediately found a way to get back to drugs, but I can assure you he turned around rather quickly. When his brother came to see him in jail, he convinced Malcolm to stop eating pork. He only did this because he thought his brother was saying this as some weird way to get him out of jail. His brother truly had committed to Islam, and that is why he was telling him to stop eating pork. His brother also told him of Elijah Muhammad's teaching, the man who popularized the Islamic faith in America in his time. Elijah Muhammad will be a very important person later, so keep this in mind. Malcolm eventually turned to Islamic faith himself because of Elijah Muhammad's teaching, which were not just those about Islamic faith. He talked practically about the wrongdoings of the white man and the whitewashing of history, as well as needing to submit to Allah. This was hard for Malcolm, and when he started getting into his newfound faith, he struggled to get on his knees, pray, and admit to his sins. Ultimately, he got better at this while also rekindling his love for education. He started rewriting the entire dictionary to become more articulate when writing people from jail. 3 of the best books Malcolm X reported reading in jail were Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois, Story of Civilization by Will Durant, and Sex and Race, Finding and Genetics by Gregor Mendel. After continuing to read books and becoming more articulate while growing his faith in jail, he was later released from prison. He immediately moved to Detroit to become a minister and convert people to Islam, the Nation of Islam led by Elijah Muhammad, that is. This time period in his life was categorized by the growth of his faith and rank in the Nation of Islam, his growing position while growing and speaking over the country, and his fallout with the Nation of Islam. Malcolm quickly grew in ranks in the Nation of Islam. With his high ranking, he was allowed to be the spokesperson and constantly be featured in the newspaper and the radio, and perform some of the famous speeches that he's known for today. Unfortunately, this all came to an end once Elijah Muhammad was found to be having affairs with multiple women in the Nation of Islam. When he talked to the women who had been accused of being in relationships with Mr. Muhammad, they told him stories about how Elijah had spoken badly about Malcolm behind his back. This leads to Malcolm feeling betrayed. So much so that at his next press conference after John F. Kennedy was assassinated, he said some very negative things and was suspended from the Nation of Islam. After his incident, he heard rumors of Elijah Muhammad and other members of the Nation of Islam wanted to kill him. Now, the last section of his life is described by the fall and rise back to reality. After being separated from the Nation of Islam, he had to change how he thought about everything. He realized that all those years he was loyal to the organization and Elijah Muhammad, the leader, and the people around him didn't fully trust him. He had gained skills and a reputation and thought that he could start his own temple and help his own people. But first he took a trip to the Mecca, the holiest city according to Islam. Traveling to the Mecca led to 3 epiphanies. The Islamic religion being taught in America was tainted, there are good white people and bad ones, and Pan-Africanism is the answer. Traveling to the Meccas led to these epiphanies due to the experiences he had with people and the knowledge he gained. He also went to Egypt, Nigeria, Ghana, and other African countries, educating him on the false representation of how Africa actually was and not the propaganda made in America. These realizations led him to go back to America and start his own group. A group of Negroes from Harlem that nobody else could reach but him because he grew up there and could relate to them. But ultimately, after coming to his realization of how to do things better, he was shortly assassinated. Less than 1 year after his return from the Mecca, to be exact. He finishes his autobiography by talking about how his story he wanted to inspire and for people to understand. Truly, a paradise on earth can exist whenever material progress and spiritual values can be properly balanced. Malcolm X. Malcolm's life story was meant to move and inspire. His story speaks to a generational curse that has plagued our community for over a century now. If you haven't figured it out yet from his story, then I'll tell you. It's blame, helplessness, and disconnection. Blame is a century-long disease in the Black community. Blaming the white man for his sins. Blaming our parents for the trauma they put on us. Blaming our situation for why we cannot do better for ourselves. Although it may seem dark, his life story as a whole speaks to things that are necessary, the necessary steps we need to take in the community to overcome this curse. We can break this curse by stopping to blame others and taking responsibility for our situation. Stop valuing entertainment and distractions and start valuing education. Stop the bad habits that come from our generational trauma, and stop the separation in our community and start with collaboration. Malcolm's life speaks to all these points, and I'll replay his life for you quickly. Malcolm's greatest epiphany came when he found out that there are good and bad white people. He finally realized this in the Mecca, obviously because he had came across people, and I don't want to spoil the book, but he came across people who were amazing and people who actually were good white people who followed the Nation of Islam. He finally fully stopped blaming one group of people for his bad experiences in America and took responsibility for how he could bring different parts of his community to make change together. But unfortunately, he was killed shortly after this. In jail, he stopped the drug use and bad habits and started to value education. Did you know that the black community is the lowest community in educational spend in the United States? It's actually very sad. Although he was led down a path of false Islamic teachings, he still learned a lot of good information in the power of mass collaboration among people. Today, the community is still divided. People would rather blame groups of people outside of their community for circumstances and their own situation. People would rather smoke, drink, and scroll their pain away with entertainment and say no to education. People would rather let generational trauma keep them in the cycle of bad habits and not change because they feel hurt. People who do succeed and make it out would rather take their money, pretend to give back when they're really just trying to make another dollar from their own community. The truth is, factually, our community was brought down by oppression, but victimhood and blame will not get us out of this situation. This is the century-long curse, but luckily we have the steps to fix it. Let's be the change we want to see in our communities and start the movement toward change. Truly, I wanted to make this video because this is something I truly believe. I don't care about how many views this gets, but if you watch to the end, I really appreciate you. I'm keeping this fully raw, and I'm gonna tell my editor, do not edit this part out. But I just wanted to extend an opportunity. If you wanna be a part of my free self-improvement, rental property investing, and online business and marketing basics course, join my free community. I'll be doing one-on-one work as much as I can while I can invest my time back into people who want to just better their lives. But I cannot do it forever, so join as soon as possible. Link is in the description, or just DM me on Instagram if the link is not in the description yet, because I am actively putting this together as of the filming of this video. Thank you so much. Peace.